In the beginning, people all thought China is going to Africa just to grab natural resources. They're going to lock up the oil and take it back to China. But I think today, it's almost a decade after this topic became one of great interest, we see that the dimensions of that engagement are very broad and wide-ranging. So of course, there's the trade. There's the foreign direct investment, but not just in minerals, it's in manufacturing. There's some in agriculture, although not as much as people think. And there's resettlement of Chinese, people going into the informal sector, they're competing with Africans. So there are a lot of different dimensions of this, some positive, some more challenging. People who use that word China sometimes think that back in Beijing there is somebody, the head of the Communist Party perhaps, who's calling all the shots and making all the rules and telling all the companies what to do. And it's not like that at all. There are many, many actors. The state-owned companies are large, they're more visible, but there are fewer of them. The bulk of Chinese investors and actors engaging in Africa are from the private sector. The Chinese oil companies, for example, some of them are headed by people that rank more highly than some ministers. For people and organizations that haven't done much research, haven't looked into it very deeply, they're still pretty much focused on the headlines. Fear that China's sunset industries and polluting industries will move to Africa so that they can escape some of the increased enforcement in China. There's concern about that. The impact of growing numbers of Chinese traders on African wildlife is something that's of concern. Organizations that have done research in this area, there's a much more nuanced understanding. There's also been more attention to what the experience in Asia and Japan's engagement in Southeast Asia and how China's engagement in Africa might replicate some of those patterns, many of which were very beneficial for Southeast Asia. China's very new at this. They're very new at being a global stakeholder and a global player. They're very new at corporate social responsibilities. So I think that the West in particular has a much better reputation in this area. Some of it is very well deserved. Not all of it is. We still have our problematic companies as well. But I think learning from how our companies engage in difficult environments in Africa is something the Chinese can learn from if they're going to attract others to both support and model themselves after China's experience. That experience has got to improve on its social and environmental sustainability. How the Chinese brought in foreign investment, how they made it work for China's development, how they managed the market, how they set up opportunities for innovation, technology transfer, how they moved up the value chain. Those kinds of lessons are available for African governments to learn, how they could set in place the same kinds of systems, the same kinds of attractions. The research that I'm doing right now is on linkages. So it's Chinese firms contracting with African farmers. What kinds of training are they offering? What kinds of knowledge is being diffused? And in the manufacturing sector, we're looking at several different areas in several different countries where ideas and innovations, training is spreading from the Chinese company into African firms. And this research is just at its beginning stage. We've done one case study already in Ethiopia in the leather sector, where we're seeing very interesting engagement by Chinese firms and how that's being transferred, those technologies, to Ethiopian firms. At the end, I hope we have a better idea of how to foster this kind of technology transfer, the skill diffusion, so not just to be a raw material and commodity exporter, but to add value to those commodities, like leather in Ethiopia, and move up the value chain. This will provide better jobs for people, it'll provide better tax revenues for governments, and it'll be the foundation for a more sustainable development.